So I think I will stand up to open this session, which is the last session of this regional platform 2024 for disaster risk reduction. So welcome. You are very close to leaving and to go back home, but this is such an important session, and I hope many will come. And actually they are coming, so there is an understanding of that. So my name is Cristiana Salvi. I need to introduce myself, and I work for the World Health Organization. I'm based in Copenhagen, and I'm the head of risk communication, community engagement, and infodemic management for health emergencies in WHO. I've been working in this area for the last 25 years, and I've never seen community so prominent in everything that we do in the context of health emergencies. I was just mentioning to Mr. Arafat, I will now introduce very soon the speakers, that WHO last week only approved by a resolution with all 53 member states a new strategy and action plan for health emergencies called Preparedness 2.0, which also calls for very strong multi-sectoral effort between the health and the civil protection sector. That's so important because we have seen that not only this is important in humanitarian emergencies, but also in health emergencies, and COVID was a clear testimony of this. Before we go into the core of the discussion, I have some housekeeping information. This session is streamed live, and we have the opportunity of a question and answer session with all of you here, but also online, so we will try and get as many questions and comments as they come in. And of course, this is translated in English, Russian, and Montenegrin, so you can use your headset, and people from home, they can use the screen options. So I just want to say that this is an incredible momentum we have here from COVID, but also from other recent emergencies in the region. And again, I've been working in the context of risk communication for many, many years, but I would say that now there is pretty much clarity that to get to behavioral change, which is so important when it comes not only to response but also preparedness of crisis, the community engagement is the entry point. We need to do that with the trusted community influencers, by empowering the community to be part of the solution. And this has been the theme throughout this regional platform, and now we want to dig a little bit deeper in the context, particularly of risk communication and false information management with these speakers. So before I go to this exceptional panel that we have today, that I have the honor to moderate, and by the way, thank you very much to UNDRR for inviting me and the Government of Montenegro, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Raed Arafat, that I trust all of you know. He's the Secretary of State, Head of Department for Emergency Situation, Ministry of Internal Affairs in Romania. And I would like to ask to Mr. Arafat an important question. So I've been knowing Mr. Arafat for many years as a champion of risk communication. I know he doesn't like to be called by that, but he definitely is. When I think of him, I think really of the main champion I know in risk communication, not only because he emphasized the importance of information that is accurate, clear, and timely, but also he elevated it politically, not only in Romania, but also throughout Europe through the action-oriented dialogue that many of you might be aware of. So you have also succeeded many times in establishing trust, which is one of the main assets we have, the public good we have. And I want to ask you, Mr. Arafat, Raed, if I may, we are at the moment, and we know all of us know, of increased natural disaster, man-made disasters. What would you think are the key challenges and opportunity we have to communicate risk, engage community, manage infodemics, at the country level, but also at broader European and global level? Mr. Arafat, right.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. And there are many things to say here. First of all, I will use a little bit the pandemic and what happened during it. Romania is a country where in the fourth wave, which we had it, the Delta wave as we call it, we lost in 2 months over 20,000 people. 90% of them nearly unvaccinated. So over 85%, up to 90% of them, non-vaccinated. We were following this every day. 90% of patients in the intensive care units, unvaccinated. Many of them elderly. And this was because of the communication in certain areas and using influencers and not only social media, but even part of the mainstream media spreading false ideas and information about vaccination. So this is why communication in such situations is extremely important. Now, of course, we are used as governments to communicate when there is a crisis, immediately to go on social media and to go on national media and start communicating. When we communicate our messages, we need partners to take those messages and potentiate them, transmit them, not deform them. And this was one of the major problems we faced, is deforming the message before it gets to the population. Just mocking the message will be sufficient to make some people lose confidence in it. So if you have certain channels are taking your message and passing it the way it is with the questions they put and so on, and you have someone else taking your message and mocking it, even an influencer, there's a good chance that some people will listen more to those influencers. So the problem with the pandemic was that it was a long-term disaster. And communication had to be managed over 2 years, very long. Not like small emergencies we face and it's a 1-2 week communication. It was 2 years. So many new things were always created in time. And there's one thing is here in the country where we need to look at the community, and in my opinion we need to start preparing the community down there so that they are ready to listen to our messages, they are ready to trust us before we are in a disaster, and then to see that they are listening to other sources that are unauthorized and that may create huge problems in the country. And I know that not all our countries faced the same challenges. There were countries where everybody worked really as a full body to communicate and to explain to the population. In our country we had various levels. We had people with whom we cooperated, but we had also mainstream media channels which saw that it is more productive to have negative debates on what the government is doing and on the measures, the vaccination and so on. So they allocated a lot of debate time. Every night they had influencers which were tailors, singers, actors, 1 or 2 doctors who have nothing to do with pandemics and so on, who spread negative information and who counteracted what the government was doing. So this is one issue. Then we go to the international scenery. And on the international scenery, we have seen that even there, we didn't all communicate the same way. There were countries where communication inside the country was separate between authorities. At least in Romania, authorities, we had a common communication. We've seen in some countries that authorities were communicating differently between them, mainly based on political bias and not on scientific or anything else. But we've also seen that our population doesn't look only at what we say. They are looking at what other country leaders are saying. So when you tell them, this is what is happening, but the same problem is being faced by the whole world, then they start looking, what is that president saying? What is that agency saying? What is that entity saying? And then they come back to you and they tell you, well, that country is doing it this way, that country is doing it that way, and you are doing it differently. So what makes us be sure that you are the right one and they are the wrong? Or we need to explain to them that it is different approaches, but we are going all to the same direction, but this needs to be explained. This means that for the future, if we want really to pass through a new situation easier, we need to pre-establish that our communication have to be common and at least to have a common ground. Maybe we communicate differently to our population, but we need to have a common ground. We need to know that if a president comes out and says, the vaccines are bad, I'm not going to vaccinate my population. There are many people in other countries that will listen to that president, and so on. So this is where we come to establish mechanisms of communication and gaining trust by the population before things happen. So what we need is to make our population understand that they need to look to what we are saying. They need to look at authorized sources. They need to be very careful of those who are coming and just spreading opinions without having any basis for them, any scientific basis. And this was hard to doing during the battle. It was very hard to doing when we were fighting the pandemic. I would give you what we had as stages in the communication in Romania. At the beginning, everybody was communicating all what we were saying. Then some entities separated and they started bringing others to say things that don't approve what the government is saying and what the authorities are saying, but those were not authorized people, not based on scientific basis or so on, different professions and so on. Then they started targeting the communicators. And the communicators, some of them retrieved. They left. They said, we will not come back. They started attacking their families. They started attacking them personally. So this left a few communicators to stay. Then we had some political influence on the communication. So we were saying the communication should be done by the technical people and so on, and we should all be together. And sometimes we were told, no, one person goes out. Next time, no, 3 persons go out, and so on. So this sometimes created some issues from the political point of view. And then the politicians themselves, they didn't get along very well. So some politicians were accusing the other politicians of the measures we were taking. So how do you want the population to trust what you are saying when you have this scenery and you have all what is evolving around you and you need a clear message, and the message is not coming clear because it's being distorted by so many factors? I don't know if there is a magic solution for this. The only solution is to educate and to prepare the population before, and to make everybody understand that you don't want to harm them, you want to help them. Just one example I will give, and I will stop. At a certain moment, we were refusing to go out and to have open debates with anti-vaxxers, which were very strong on some TV channels. And we said no, because anyhow, there is no way you will have a gain in the opinion, because they are anti, you are going to say that this is how it is, but they will continue and they are promoted very much. So what happened, one day we had a colleague from another country who's Romanian. She said, I will go in and I will go into such a discussion. She went in, she did very well. She answered them very well. The second day, they found her father. All the media was with her father's interviews. Her father was an anti-vaxxer and he attacked his daughter. And they finished all the impact she had by attacking her through her father. So these were planned ways of communication, and it was really a communication war, I would say. It was a battle between us and those who wanted to communicate differently. So it's not only social media, it's even mainstream media, and it's the influence of every country, what we say and so on. So at least at the level of the WHO, there was some communication which was national, but not everybody took it into the country. So this is how we need to start looking on how we will communicate together in the next long-term crisis.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Raed. And I think the collective effort is really the one we would look into. Like it was clearly said, no one is prepared unless everybody is prepared. And we need to start at the preparedness phase now. I mean, we are in a moment, at least when it comes to health emergencies, of a little bit of peace. I mean, I don't want to even say that loud. And that's where we need to take the momentum. And I would like to immediately ask you a follow-up question, because, I mean, of course, you mentioned a lot of challenges. You actually nailed many of those. And what are you doing actually currently in Romania to establish this culture of disaster prevention?
We have several projects that are going on. One of them, I mentioned it yesterday, is our Be Prepared site. This is a portal, in fact. It is called Be Prepared, and it's in Romanian and in English now, but we are still translating it in other languages, and we are putting on this portal beprepared.ro for those who are interested. We are putting on this portal all the guidelines and information the population may need now, and we are telling them, don't try to find out about the disaster during the disaster. Find out about it before. The second thing we did here is in 2022, we convinced the Prime Minister then, who was very eager to do something about misinformation and so on, to issue a governmental decision, which is equal to obligatory legislation, that every public site in Romania will have a link to the Be Prepared portal. So now if you go on any public site in Romania, especially presidency, government site, the Prime Minister, all the public sites, except for one or two ministries which they didn't still put it, all the others have the link to this platform, which means we are telling everyone we are doing the same thing. All of us are doing the same thing. We are recommending to you those guidelines and so on. The third thing we are doing is that we are working with UNICEF, for example, now, on transforming part of our guidelines into child-friendly guidelines. And we are going to go with them into the schools and into areas where we can go towards the youngsters and start encouraging them to go and learn about how to prepare for a disaster and how to be prepared. Then we have some actions that we do in the country. Caravans. So we have planned caravans every weekend, especially in rural areas where we go and do various trainings, prevention, not only for health, but also for different types of emergency situations, floods and so on. And this is going all the time. We have what we call the Civil Protection Week every year, which ends on the 4th of March, which is the commemoration of our earthquake in 1977. But every year there is a week dedicated for civil protection, where we go also into the issues of communication with the population. These are only a few examples of what we are doing at this moment in Romania.
That's really amazing. It's about working for consistency of messaging, establishing the authoritative voice of the government. Is about, yes.
Yeah, what I want to add is one of the most important things, and what we are trying to do is to target the children.
The children,
It's the societal resilience we need to build in the schools. We need to teach the children on how to upraise and how to look at the news and to look at its source to see if they can believe it or not, how to differentiate between a fake news, an unsure news, and how to go to the correct source to find the news about a certain subject.
That's absolutely,
this is something very important.
Absolutely important, and about catching people early. I mean, early on, to create really this culture when they're still very young, and also bringing the information where people are. I mean, you mentioned about the caravan. So, Rayad, I know you need to leave us, you need to catch your flight, but I really want, on behalf of everybody, to thank you for your immense, knowledge and insight and all the actions that you're doing in Romania.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sorry.
No worries, no worries. Thank you. Okay, I'm doing a mess now. Amazing insights from Mr. Arafat. He already touched a lot of the issues that we are continuing to touch with our panel. And now I want to introduce the panel. They are bringing together different perspectives from government, but also from civil society. And this is really, when it comes to communicating risks, engaging community, and addressing false information, this is really not whole of government, but also a whole of society effort. This is so important as we go onward. So I would like to introduce Ms. Véronique Leydeux in the center. She's the head of Natural Risk Department for the Directorate of Prevention and Risks in France. So welcome, Véronique. Ms. Lisa Robinson, she's at the end. She's the head of advisory and specialist on disaster risk communication at BBC Media Action. Welcome. Ms. Nathalie González Villarini, Senior Accessibility Expert at ONCE Fundación in Spain. Welcome, Nathalie. And then Mr. Kjartan Ernie Jelson. I don't know what I did with your names, but he's the Assistant to Director of Health in the Health Directorate in Iceland. So I will start asking a question to all of you, and I will start with Veronique. We have been listening a lot about preparedness, resilience. These are key words that have been mainstreamed across the regional platform and also now. And we are eager to actually hear from you other example. We already heard from Mr. Arafat, but other example, Veronique, on how we can effectively engage community before a crisis hit so they're better equipped. If you can share some insights of your experience or what defines a risk culture and how to build it. So Veronique will have a few slides, and it would be great if we can show them. And you have the device. That's perfect. The floor is yours, Veronique.
Thank you very much. So it's quite a challenge to speak after Mr. Arafat, but I'm very happy to have the opportunity for sharing our experience in France. So building a risk culture is not at all a brand new policy in France, because informing people of the risks surrounding them became mandatory in 2003 by a law called Risk Law. However, 3 years ago, we had surveys showing that only 24% of the people were aware of their own exposure to risk. Therefore, we took action and we broke silos and worked closely with our colleagues from other ministries and decided to enhance risk culture. So what we called the All Resilience Facing Risk concept was born. And the objective was to reach each citizen. But how could we achieve this goal? Not alone, that was true. So we wanted to associate local governments and civil society. And concerning tools, what you can see on the left part of the slide, our plan relies on a number of different and complementary approaches that I will now describe. So first of all, we communicate with the public through 2 annual communication campaigns. One is on forest and vegetation fires, and the second one is on floodings. So these campaigns highlight the best practices to adopt to prevent the events, and of course to adopt if the event happens. These are multi-channel campaigns we made in anticipations that are including TV and radio ads, press inserts, and of course social media. Speaking about the young people, we also developed an innovative tool. We called it Risk Boss, to help teachers and prevention workers to spread the word about the right habits to adopt, and that from the early age. So you maybe had the opportunity yesterday to saw the boxes we offered to the Minister of Montenegro. So it works like an escape game, this box. You have a limited time and you have to answer questions to be able to open the box. And inside you will find riddles and quizzes which aim to memorize the right gestures. Within a few days, we will also launch a brand new, something very brand new in our communication plan. It is a podcast called Coup de Pouce, dedicated to families with young children. So the journalists you can see on the picture went to families and observed them in their everyday life and asked them questions about risk. And in response, the expert, so it was me in this case, reminds what are the risks and how to prevent them. So we will test the podcast quite soon. Since 2022, a National Resilience Day has been introduced. So it is a call for projects that highlight initiatives and workshop sessions about risk. So the first year we had about 2,000 events all over France, including overseas territories. And this year we think we should reach up to 10,000 events all over France with a focus point on the 13th of October. Speaking about digital tools now, we are operating a website called GeoRisk. With this tool, you will find very educational information on risk. And for example, you will be able to make automatic reports about your own exposures in the area you are living, for example. Just speaking about the crisis management, FR Alert is our early warning systems that allows anyone with a mobile phone to be notified in real time of their presence in a danger zone. And to finish this quiet presentation of examples, something we created in 2022. So 2022 was a terrible year in France with very severe forest fires. So after this huge catastrophe, we created what we call the forest weather forecast. So this forecast indicates a forest fire danger level. It is based on both weather forecast and the dryness of vegetation. And during the forest fire season, we provide this information, of course, on a website. But what is quite interesting for us is that TV channels broadcast also this information as they do for weather forecasts.
Great.
And for flooding, for the past 24 years, it is what you can see on the right side, we have a website called VigiCrew, and it has provided 24 information about the risk of main waterways overflowing. And what we do 2 years ago, a free mobile application was created, and it allowed to provide warnings directly on your telephone. So it was the examples I wanted
Thank
to
you,
underline.
thank you, Veronique. That was inspiring, and I think this concept of addressing children, young people, is really what is coming up. What Mr. Rafat was saying, and now Veronique is highlighting. Addressing people at the young age is really what can make a difference in establishing a risk culture. You also mentioned the importance of interactivity, because it's not only passive receiving information, but interacting with this information, having the opportunity of report about exposure. You also mentioned gamification, and this is, gaming and quiz. And working in the context of infodemic management, we see that gamification, so working on games, is one of the most effective ways for people to understand. For instance, there are games that put the users in the shoes of someone who manipulates the information, so that when they are exposed to that information, they are better able to identify the manipulated information. So these are great examples, Veronique, and I will come back to you just a little bit later. But now I would like to hear from Lisa. We heard the perspective of governments now, the government of Romania, the government of France. Now I would like to turn to an organization like BBC Media Action. You have been doing a lot in the context of working with media, communicating risk, but also engaging with communities for also joint decision making and also addressing false information. We would like to hear from you how much it is important to work across the full spectrum of these areas in the context of working with the media. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I think it's helpful to remember that when we talk about risk with publics, we're talking about things that are quite scary or complex or confusing and uncertain. And it takes a lot more than just one-way information to really help people process that and make really critical decisions. In order to do such a really difficult task, and really not just help people understand, but help them to make critical decisions and then take action really requires the expertise across society, as you said. It takes an all-of-society approach. So while I'm hearing fantastic examples in both cases of governments taking an excellent initiative to really put that information out, build trust proactively, and really adapt that to multi-hazards, there still needs to be more. And people are living and dealing and talking about risk in their everyday lives all the time, and so is the media. And they will do it in their own way, I suppose. I think it's helpful to think about how we can pair up the different actors that are thinking about risk, that's civil society and government and media, and how we can build those skills so that it happens a lot more effectively. From the government's perspective, I think having a comprehensive disaster risk communication strategy that's integrated across the disaster management cycle really is key to unlocking a lot of those challenges that we see. And those comprehensive strategies will, of course, touch on what Christiana was mentioning around risk communication, community engagement, and managing misleading or false information. I recently worked on an initiative, I led an initiative. Could we have the slides somehow? I think there's a slide up here after yours. Next one. Yeah, Milos, you know the order there. Thanks. Well, I'll go ahead and start. Well, thank you. Who's getting those up? I led an initiative that really was about building the capacity of communicators from many different sectors to communicate about risk more effectively. And when I mean effectively, I ultimately mean take action. So it's really shifting how people think, feel, and act around disaster risk. Part of those initiatives it was really two-part, actually. One was about building those skills and capacity, that knowledge for communicators to design those strategies that really make sense. And that grid there, that graph, is one of the ways that we suggested that happen. That's in these guides here that covers an awful lot of content, so I can let you look at that later. Part of that is understanding audiences or publics really well, understanding what their barriers are to engaging with disaster risk communication. And that comes through research. So understanding, planning a comprehensive design, delivering it, and improving that all the time. It's a never-ending process. I think we really need to shift our conception of risk communication around products and shift that into an understanding of a process. So think of communication as a process, not a product. We also need to get better at measuring the impact of risk communication. That really isn't prominent enough, and we don't have enough evidence of what works and what doesn't. So in addition to that aim of just increasing the ability of communicating more effectively, the second intention that I had was to build the relationships between those stakeholders to communicate jointly together. And that literally meant putting different actors in the same room, behind a closed door, with no microphone or camera present, and let them really understand what the barriers were. Government and technical experts have real difficulties that the media just don't understand, and it really impedes their ability to not just report, because media is everything, media is also entertainment, but to really represent those challenges fairly and accurately. On the flip side, I must say that there's a lot of limitations that the media face that the technical experts don't necessarily appreciate as well. We're dealing with shrinking and fragmented media ecosystems. That can be assessed by governments as well. We're dealing with an infodemic, as Christiana will say, but not just around health, around everything. Audiences are struggling to navigate that. Resources are so slim. Media houses don't have the time or the people or the resources to spend an afternoon with experts necessarily to understand it, to communicate it. And ultimately, they're businesses that need to operate and make money. Audiences tune in for interesting, entertaining, engaging content. And if the technical information is too tough, it takes a lot of creativity and time to turn it into something watchable reachable or listenable. It's absolutely possible, but it takes a lot more investment than I think we appreciate. So all of this can be taken into consideration in these comprehensive risk communication strategies that I'd like to see that center around dialogue, not just provision of information. And if we do that, I think ultimately we'll have much more effective disaster risk management across the countries.
Thank you, Lisa. I think you touched upon two important points that I want to highlight. One is building the capacity and the capabilities of those working in this area. From our perspective as WHO, we have seen that this area of work, this discipline per se, is just born. So we don't have a really profession that are focusing on the three areas together: risk communication, community engagement, and infodemic management. So we are actually working to establish the mechanism to build the skills and the capabilities, because we know that the next pandemic will come. It's not a matter of if, but of when, and we want to be prepared. So this element of shaping the skills of those that can be active. And the other very important that is transitioning to the next speaker is about understanding our audiences. Understanding who they are and what are the barriers for them to access this vital information. And that's how I will get to the next speaker, which is Natalie from Spain, ONCE Fundación. Yes. Oh, okay. Yes. Okay, because we went a little bit over time. So, Natalie, I will just pass the floor a minute to Christine, and then I will come back to you. Is that okay with you? Just because Christine needs to leave. And we would like to hear one example of something very concrete from Christine. So Christina Andersson, she is a project manager for Prepare Youth Pilot at the Swedish Civil Contingency Agency, and she also been basically in charge of a brochure within Sweden called In Case of Crisis and War. And this brochure is going to be in the next 2 weeks in the mailbox of all the Swedish people. So Christina will share with us this project before she needs to leave. Yes, so 3 minutes with you, Christine.
Thank you so very much, Christiana. Thank you for letting me have a little bit of time to tell you about first a few words about this Prepare You pilot project that I'm managing. And the consortium consists of, besides of Sweden as lead, of my professional project partners from Norway, a Norwegian Directorate for Civil Protection. It consists of Spain and Spanish Directorate General for Civil Protection, and also Belgium and National Crisis Center. The project is a little bit more than halfway. It started in February this year, and the project will present conclusions and recommendations on how the member states and partner states could cooperate on an EU level to increase risk awareness and preparedness of the population across the Union. For this, we have had great help from the CIMA Research Foundation, and the project will also recommend on how to increase risk awareness and preparedness of vulnerable groups on an EU level. The project Prepare Your Pilot support the Union Disaster Resilience Goal number 2, Prepare. And the project believe in a more unified and comprehensive approach to risk communication and preparedness across EU, and to take more advantage of being a union. Much is done on a national level to increase risk awareness and preparedness, but the Prepare Your Pilot project will recommend risk communication activities on an EU level that we believe could work and be adopted across the Union, and hopefully in as many member states and partner states as possible. Then I would just like to say a few words about this Sweden, this new brochure. in Sweden if in the case of crisis or war. Some of you might remember that we distributed a brochure to all Swedish households in 2018, 5.2 million households. Due to a worsened political security situation, but also other threats like the climate change, we now distribute a new and updated version in just 2 weeks' time. The focus on this new brochure is more on the threat and the preparedness for war compared to the one in 2018. It gives also more of practical advice on how to prepare, for example, on how to prepare, but even more on practical advices on how to act when something serious has happened. For example, if you hear an air raid warning, but also how you can stop a bleeding or how to recognize false information. We also give advice to people with special needs in the brochure, for example, deaf or blind people, and we cooperate with different agencies and organizations supporting people with different disabilities when it comes on how to reach out with this important information to these groups. The information in the brochure will be available in 11 different languages, in Braille, in Swedish sign language, and in audio format and as short film texted in different languages. Thank you. Thank you for giving me this time, Christiana.
Thank you, Christine, for being very concise and to the point. I wish you safe travels. So, Christine, highlighted again the collective efforts that needs to be done at EU level, so not one single country, but every country together to make sure that every single person is safe. And also, of course, focusing on the importance of updating the type of information and advice we give to our citizens based on the imminent threats, but also based on what they are ready to receive. Because, of course, the context of the increased conflicts across Europe are creating a new perception of our citizens about the threat of war and conflict. And it's very important that we immediately acknowledge and act upon those. So now I'm happy to give the floor to Nathalie. And I was linking this to what Lisa was saying before about the importance of understanding our audiences and understanding the barrier of our audiences. Also to access information. This is what ONCE Fundación is doing, is really putting accessibility to vital information and advice during disaster and before disaster at the forefront of their action. Can you share with us, Nathalie, why this is so important to be done?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Like Christiana said, I am a senior accessibility expert at ONCE Foundation. We are a leading disability organization from Spain, and we have a lot of presence in the European Union. Our goal is to promote the full social inclusion of people with disabilities, mainly through employment opportunities and universal accessibility. Promoting accessible risk communication and inclusive disaster management and preparedness is part of this goal. We have provided immersive training to emergency professionals from different fields. We have worked with over 3,000 professionals, teaching them how to treat a person with disability and to understand the needs of people with disabilities. This experience had made us see that despite all the progress made in the past in accessibility and also on the rights of people with disabilities, major gaps remain. Accessibility is still largely absent from risk communication and also from disaster management and preparedness in general. I think what happened in Valencia could be an example. I just heard that the early warning system and information on real-time was not accessible for people with hearing disability, and it probably made things worse. So, also information about the accessibility of shelters, transportation, and services in general is usually not available, and it's very hard to find it. And this increases the likelihood of people making the wrong decisions. It is important that managers, professionals, and stakeholders realize that accessibility must be a priority, not only in risk communication, but in the entire disaster management process. If you want risk communication to be comprehensive, you have to make it accessible. Every plan, every protocol, every campaign must be designed with accessibility in mind. And also, you must realize that accessibility is actually for everyone. People with disabilities benefit the most from accessibility. But it can help any person. You don't need to have a disability. What is good for people with disabilities is good for the rest of the population. Thank you. I want to say something what is showing in my PowerPoint. It's a guide made by Guardia Civil, that they are police officers in Spain that we have trained. And they came up with this guide with pictograms to improve risk communication. This is really good, and I brought it in case it can inspire other people. So right now, what is showing in the PowerPoint is the moment in which people have to identify with a police officer and telling them what is going on, or what is happening to you. Okay?
Thank you. Thank you, Natalie. And we couldn't... I think we couldn't emphasize more the importance of accessibility to the information. I mean, we can develop the best content ever, but if people cannot access it in time of disasters, I mean, like Natalie said, I mean, people take the wrong decision if they don't have the information. So I think Lisa before was mentioning these comprehensive plans that government would need to develop. This element needs to be there, absolutely. So thank you, Natalie, for sharing this. And now I'm closing the circle with Kirtan. He's a friend. Kirtan, we have been working with him already in the context of the readiness to the Icelandic volcanic just few months back. And his experience ranges, of course, from the pandemic, where many of us have our experience, but also to the situation of the volcano. And he has really experienced how important is trust at the center of everything we do. We already discussed it with Mr. Arafat, and I would like now to ask the question to Kirtan. So, of course, trust is a context-specific concept. We know that very well, and it can change country by country, but there are some elements that can be highlighted as fundamental to the concept of trust. We would like to hear from Kirtan's experience. Thank you. The floor is yours. 3 minutes.
Thank you. Yes, this is a huge question, and I have 3 minutes. So, just to begin, we have evidence-based information on what good communication is based on. It's sympathy, it's transparency, it's engaging with stakeholders in a meaningful way. All of these are the fundamentals of building trust. But when we try to utilize the trust that is in place, I believe that we should look at not just why should people trust us and trust the information that we are giving, but are we worthy of that trust? This requires extreme scrutiny during peacetime on our communication efforts. And this is something that we have been trying to do. We haven't had a lot of time because we have seen back-to-back crises in Iceland. But we were fortunate enough when the pandemic started that we had high levels of trust, not in politicians or in banking, but in civil society and the governmental institutions, including mine and the Civil Defense Department. We utilized that trust and we promoted extreme transparency during the pandemic. Even before we had the first cases, we had press briefings. We invited documentary filmmakers to our crew, everything. We prepared as we could before the first cases emerged, and that somehow helped us going forward. In March of 2021, the eruption started, as you can see, very close to the capital area in Reykjavik. Because we had some success with communication during the pandemic, we went into this new and strange time of volcanic activity near the capital with high levels of trust. And we managed to promote that, but these are ongoing difficulties which require constant reevaluation of our communication efforts. So the main takeaway, the main element that maintains trust is honesty and transparency. You have to acknowledge when you make mistakes, you have to own your mistakes, you have to promote your successes, definitely, but being open and honest in your communication is the key thing, because when you trust people with difficult information about when you make mistakes, it invites them into your circle of empathy. You are saying, I trust you to handle difficult information even when I have made mistakes. So there is a mutual trust that needs to be maintained, and it can be achieved with transparency. This is the case for Iceland. We are unique in many ways, but I firmly believe that going forward we will investigate and educate ourselves even more on the transparency aspect of communication, especially during times of deeply unsettling uncertainty. So, because we have trust that people can handle difficult information, even when we don't even have the answers. And I think that, and you can actually see this online, we invited a documentary filmmaker when the pandemic started, before we had our first case, and he was in the room with us throughout the first 3 waves, had his camera, he recorded everything, even went to the cabinet meetings where we were discussing what might happen, our darkest, most evil scenarios that might happen. And we just wanted him to be with us. We talked about it openly, he was with us, and this eventually turned into a 8-episode documentary TV show on the National Broadcasting Radio in Iceland. This was important for us, and this is just an example of how we try to portray the appearance of transparency and acted on it in a way that was good for us. So thank you. This is all I have now, but I am of course ready to answer any questions after this.
Thank you. Thank you. That was really a key word, Kirtan. Transparency is at the core of risk communication, really. We couldn't emphasize that more. And it also gives, I mean, what Kirtan just mentioned, the concept of trust is not only the citizen trusting the authorities, but it's also the authorities trusting that the citizen can take the information as it is. We don't have to tell them that all is going to be well and all is well when it is not. We need to trust their ability to get this information and help and support the response in a very transparent way and say what we know and what we don't know. I think this is something that we can elaborate on, Kirtan. So I will go now to ask our panelists another question, and I really need you to answer in 1 minute before we want to give the opportunity for question and answer from the floor. So I will turn to you, Veronique, and I think we have been really focusing here on the concept of preparedness and resilience. Again, I mean, doing all of this before a crisis hit. Also transparency. We need to establish a culture of transparency that builds into the culture of risk. So when you implemented your campaign, Veronique, you actually started from assessing your risk communication capacities. You evaluated your campaign, and you were looking into how you can improve your strategies. This is a very important virtual loop, that needs to be established. It's not only the action, but everything that is around the action, from the assessment to the evaluation and building back better. So can you say in 1 minute,
Yes.
what is your experience in this?
Yes, less than 1 minute, I think, with the example you can see. So we systematically post-test our campaign just to be sure that they have been seen, but above all to test and to see if people have retained the good prevention gestures. So one example concerning our flooding campaign, we totally renewed it because we tried the one you saw and we took the wrong path because we wanted to add a touch of humor. You see, for example, if it's raining a lot, stay at work, it could save your life. But people didn't remember the risk or didn't see the message because the risk was not enough present on the image. So it reminds me of the video we saw yesterday at the beginning of the conference. We have to show the risk so people can get involved with the risk. So it was quite funny, but it was a wrong example. I think it's less than a minute.
That's great, Veronica, because in 1 minute you mentioned something so important, the importance of testing everything you produce, the content and the material. You can think of doing the best thing in the world, but unless you go out there, you identify your audience and test your material, you might not have done a good job, that it doesn't resonate. So testing your materials is so important. And you mentioned that you needed to show the risk. So there was a very important visual element there. And I'm turning to Nathalie, the visual element. Can you share with us in 1 minute some of the example of accessible risk communication content? I'm sure that there is a visual element in everything you do.
Well, I was giving a few tips how to improve risk communication, make it accessible. First of all, if you are publishing information about disasters on a website, make sure it follows accessibility requirements, specifically the web content accessibility guidelines that are available online for free. Also, it's very important to learn about the realities of people with disabilities. We aren't homogeneous, we are very diverse, and this is important. And also, our knowledge and experience must be treated as expert knowledge. Learn how people with disabilities use technology, make information easy to read and to understand. This means using clear, simple language, short sentences. Sometimes people are blamed for not following instruction, but I wonder, were instructions clear enough for people to understand? It is also important to make information available in different formats. Not all blind people know Braille, and not all deaf people know sign language. And if you are using inclusive language, make sure it is accepted by the audience, because there isn't a consensus, and sometimes what is accepted by one group can be offensive to the other. So you have to be careful and do a little research about inclusive language. Also, if you have to interact in person, keep in mind that some people have disabilities that are invisible. And there are also people that aren't aware that they have a disability. So you have to be patient, and if the person doesn't react the way you expect, think, maybe the person isn't hearing me or isn't understanding me. Not everybody feels confident enough to tell you, hey, I didn't hear, or hey, I didn't understand you. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathalie. Thank you. It's not important only what we say, but also how we understand our audience process the information. This is so important. And so understanding our audience, segmenting, understanding our audience is fundamental. So we heard some tips from Nathalie, and now I want to talk to Kirtan again and hear his own tips about one thing that is fundamental, again, in terms of how people process the information that is given during emergency. That is the uncertainty. If there is one single feature that is critical in risk communication in emergencies, is speaking in uncertainty. And this links so much with the transparency concept that you share with us. So Kjartan, can you share with us how you manage to speak effectively in uncertainty in your experience in Iceland? 1 minute.
So during the pandemic and the volcanic activity, we always talked about being just more and more confused, but consistently on a higher level. And we believe that that is something that is inherent to all crises. Communicating uncertainty, it involves a certain amount of humility and compassion, but above all, confidence. That you are sharing in the unknown, and you are inviting people to take a step with you into unknown difficulties and scenarios. This can be extremely useful, especially during the early stages of a crisis. During the volcanic activity, because it's very different from a pandemic, obviously, because the uncertainty is not just, it doesn't really concern a day-to-day events, but maybe weeks, months, even years, decades maybe, or hundreds of years. So the key factor in that, from what we have learned so far, is the engagement with the affected community and working on these uncertainties with the stakeholders in the community. This has been extremely important, and it's going to be extremely important. The town that was evacuated because of the volcanism, some 3,000 people live there. They will, most of them will never return home. So we have to work with them on the uncertainties that are unique to them. And that is an ongoing thing, and that will be an ongoing thing for a long time.
Yeah. Thank you, and thank you, Kjartan. So working with the affected community, and again, trusting the community to understand all the information we provide. When we speak with in uncertainty, we say what we know, and we also say what we don't know. Sometimes it's difficult for authorities to say what they don't know, because they're afraid of losing their authority. But Kjartan mentioned one word, empathy. And saying what you don't know makes you closer to the people. You are in this together, and you trust each other in supporting the response. So that's an important lesson. Thank you for sharing. And now I turn to Lisa for my final question. So a lot of insights. I think we have touched upon so many important issues in the context of communicating risks, engaging community, and managing false information. If there is one single advice you want to give to government, you have already highlighted the plan, the comprehensive plans. But how can government work better to improve disaster risk communication, and maybe engage the media to do so as a key stakeholder? 1 minute.
Yeah, I think we've heard a lot of examples about how media and communicators across society can contribute to the success or the mess of your risk communication, your public risk communication. So I think the one thing really is have a plan, have a really comprehensive disaster risk communication strategy that doesn't stand alone off on the side in some marketing or comms department, but that is integrated across the disaster management spectrum. I love the examples that we've heard on the panel and that I've heard for the past few days, but I really think that that is it. How to build those relationships between government and media will take 3 days to talk about, but it absolutely can be done. We've got lots of examples, and it does take time. So right now is when we should start thinking about building those relationships. I can talk to you later about what we've seen work in those cases.
Yeah, and this is a very important point that Lisa is highlighting. Let's work together. I mean, sometimes there is some concern about approaching the media and how working with them, but they are definitely a key stakeholder and influencer in our communities. During COVID, we have made an analysis of the key influencers. Journalists are among them, including health workers, including community leaders. Youth have been highlighted, civil society organizations. And working with them, particularly in peacetime, can make a difference in how we address disasters. So, I will need to finish this session in 12 minutes. And that's something I've been asked to do. So we'll devote 10 minutes to question and answers, and then we'll wrap up the discussion. I already have a couple of questions from the audience online, but before turning to them, I would like to ask whether there's anybody here that would like to ask a question to our panelists. If you would like to do, please identify yourself and ask your question. Anything? I can see people looking around. Yes, there is a question here, please.
Thank you very much. So I'm from UNDRR, and thank you very much already for sharing your experiences. I think it's the best possible thing for all of us as stakeholders to actually learn from these experiences. I have a question which is a bit specific for Mrs. Robinson. You partly a bit answered it, but maybe not completely. My question is the following. I would say disasters and crises are always very catchy, if not even sexy for media. And there is no problem for putting something in the main newspaper and the main media when there is something. Yes. But as actually stakeholders of disaster risk reduction and prevention, we are extremely struggling for actually pushing our information, pushing what we would like to say before actually the crisis happen. And the media are, from my own experience, extremely, in a way, reluctant or shy for actually using their space and their pages for talking about that. So would you have any advice for us? Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead. No. Can you open the back? Try again. Try again, Lisa.
Is it working now?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. I love that question because I love that area of work, and that's. Short answer is it takes a lot of time, effort, and creativity to turn something that's ultimately boring, scary, into what comes across as something much more interesting. Of course, disaster risk reduction touches parts of everyone's life, and it should be interesting and engaging, but it can be complex. It takes extra resources for the media to turn that into content that makes sense and is engaging for audiences. It absolutely can be done. I think that the trick for governments or anyone else, when you're contacting the media with something, think about it from their end. They have to turn that into a story or something that resonates with audiences in their everyday lives. So they're really strapped for resources like everyone, but if you can find that link or that connection to either a newsworthy event or something that's interesting, do that legwork for them so they can start seeing that story happening as you're talking to them about your issues. So I would say stop thinking so much about your issues, start thinking about what the audience wants to hear or see in their everyday lives and try to make that connection. Then you can work with the media to develop some story ideas. And I ask a question linked to yours. Is anybody here from Poland? No? Okay, so there's a drama, I think it's Polish, that I saw on Netflix called High Water. Has anyone seen this? No. Okay, maybe you should look it up. So it combines sex, drugs, and local disaster risk governance in a drama series.
Wow.
And the sex and the drugs is marginal, but ultimately it's about the risk management, flood risk management, modeling, gender. It's all in there, and it's great entertainment for people. And that's what I want to see more of, really, to get over that problem of headlines only.
That's a great example. I think this is really a way to make prevention sexy, which unfortunately is not. Well, human stories are also very much liked by the media also. So if we manage to shape our content around human stories, and this is exactly what you were mentioning, right? I have two questions from the audience and online, and I would like to ask the first one to Veronique. It is very much linked to what you were saying before, and it's about young people, how to engage young people in a way that make them engaged, not bored. And if you could give us an example of a catchy risk communication campaign that has been engaging the youth. I think you mentioned that before. If you would like to share any tips on how that can be done in an effective way.
Yeah.
Yes.
We didn't have a specific campaign to young people, but we work on workshops during the National Resilience Day, and we succeed to have the educational ministry became a partner, and we gave them a lot of tools. And we also work with associations, and we make exercises with young people. It seems that it is the best way for them to memorize the right gestures. And we also had, so in France it's not a Netflix, but we have a magazine for young people. It's Le Journal de Mickey, so it's Mickey newspapers. And during the season forest fire, we put little quizzes and little stories with Donald Duck's nephews. So it was directly very funny for them, asking questions, and it worked well.
Great, thank you. So it's very interactive with the quiz, with the games, and I also like the mention of the workshop. I mean, the way we are doing it is really through the co-creation with the audiences we want to, basically the audiences that are at risk. So co-creating with young people is actually a very good way to first make them engaged and interested, but also inform what we do with a new way, a new path, and think through their lens. I have a second question. Is there any other question from the floor? Because before I turn, there's a question over there. And then I think I have to move on.
Hi, I'm Tim. I'm from People in Need. Christina, I used to work with your WHO colleague, Roy Wadia. He was my line manager in Bangkok.
Okay.
And I worked in comms. I worked with BBC Media Action, different partnerships. We've been talking about this topic for a decade, and we were quite optimistic in the early days of social media that how we can reach all of these different communities because of social media, because of text messaging. But now I feel like we are in a massive building fire, and we're walking up to it with a teaspoon of water. So I'm kind of looking at the whole panel, and Lisa, you as well, like for a little bit of inspiration. Like, I mean, given the challenges we face in communicating, as Mr. Arafat was saying earlier, what can we do, like within our communities on the ground, to sort of change the course of the direction that we're going? We're living in a pool of disinformation, and I feel like I'm drowning in it. And personally and professionally, it's like, where do we go from here? So sorry for the doom and gloom question, but yeah.
Do you want to address the question to a speaker?
I mean, the whole panel can answer, or whoever feels comfortable answering.
Okay, so basically how we can navigate the current growth of false information and be better communicator. Who wants to take that? Kirtan? I should, no, I'm a moderator. I can do it later, but first I want to hear from you. Kirtan, do you want to try and answer that?
Yeah, this is a huge issue, of course, and there are no doubt many ways to go about it. One of those things is investing in schooling, in science, investing in positive influencers. This is going to take some time, obviously, because I do fear that if we push too hard, for instance, with editorializing social media and so forth, that can have the opposite effect. So pushing too hard can be problematic, but it has to be a priority to working with the young people, with our children, that they have their proper skills for critical thinking and so forth. So I don't have any solutions for the immediate problem, which certainly is one, but this has to be one of the ways we go about figuring this out.
Yeah, you touched a very important point, and maybe I can complement that from the World Health Organization perspective. What we found very clearly is that false information management, infodemic management, it cannot be done by one organization or one country. We need to come together. So what we are doing now is, in the next couple of months, we are launching the first European Infodemic Preparedness Response Alliance, which is basically pulling together governments, civil society organizations, fact-checkers, media, in order to find a platform not only to respond, but also to prepare and prevent false information. This is not specific to the health sector, even though, of course, we are this health sector organization, and we would like also to engage with other sectors, including the civil protection, because I was discussing just before with Mr. Arafat, is so fundamental when it comes to emergency management, the health and the civil protection come together. So more news to come. We are working very closely with our UNDRR colleagues, and we will be happy to share this with you. So I think we need to wrap up, and maybe I will ask one final question to Nathalie before we do. Can you give us one example from the work of ONCE Fundación of how you make your risk communication very accessible to people with disability? We finish with that.
Yeah. Like I said, we provide immersive training. We invite the participants through, for example, experience what it is to be blind, covering their eyes, giving them a white cane, and having another participant guiding them through space so they can understand what should be done in case a blind person finds themselves in an emergency situation. Also, we invite them to try to be deaf. That is the harder part, because even if you cover your ears or you wear plugs, you're still hearing. But we try, and I think it's been very positive. At least because the Guardia Civil doing the guide in pictogram, which is very good. I think they understood what the problem is. So in that regard, we're very happy. We have trained a lot of people, mostly people working in wildfires, because I know right now we're having a disaster caused by flood in Spain, but Spain is very prone to wildfires. So that's a job we also do.
Thank you, Nathalie. So how important it is that governments, when they think their plan and they think their communication, involve organizations like ONCE Fundación in Spain to understand the needs of people with disability, because in disasters, nobody can be left behind. So that's a very important point. So we are at the end of the session. We were a little bit delayed with the schedule, but I think it was so rich to hear our panel speakers. So I want to thank all of you, Nathalie, Veronique, Kjartan, and Lisa, for your insights, for sharing your experience in a very concrete and practical ways. I think there's so much wealth of information that we can really capture in order to improve together as a community. I want to thank you for listening at a little bit late morning, and I think we are now moving on with the closure of the regional platform. Please stay in the room, because the closing ceremony will happen here, and I will give back the floor and the lead to UNDRR colleagues. Thanks for being with us this morning, and have everybody safe travel back home. Thank you.